Hello and welcome to GameSack. It's been about 8 years since there's been a brand new, same name, different game episode. Now, if this concept sounds a little bit confusing, allow me to explain. Basically, you have a bunch of different games that are all called the same thing, but get this, they're different games. Yeah, now that that's cleared up, I just want to say that I'm not going to be covering similarly named games, nor will I be covering any PC games, though I don't think that really matters for this episode because there's no samely named games of the titles I'm covering that are on the PC. I'm probably going to regret saying that, aren't I? Anyway, let's get to a bunch of games that, you guessed it, all have the same name, but are in fact different games. Have you ever heard of Jurassic Park? If not, it was a movie released in the early 90s and, well, it was kind of popular.
It's a dinosaur!
Of course, video game manufacturers wanted to stick their hands into that sweet, sweet honeypot. So we got a bunch of different Jurassic Park games, 4 of them from Sega alone. Let's start with Jurassic Park on the Genesis. You begin by playing as Dr. Grant, which is Sam Neill's character in the movie. The plot is loosely based on the movie or the book. The T-Rex has escaped, the fences are down, dinosaurs are free, and now you need to make your way to the power station. Like I said, loosely. Along the way, you shoot tons of dinosaurs with a bunch of different weapons. The control definitely takes a bit of getting used to as it's quite stiff and slow. Still, after you've played for a while, the game does start to feel better. There are levels for you to play through as a raptor as well, and you're chasing Dr. Grant, specifically. The visuals aren't bad, all things considered, but they're certainly not fantastic. The same can be said for the sound and music. Overall, not a bad game, but you have to give it time to grow on you, as first impressions aren't that good here. Jurassic Park also came to the Sega CD. This one is a point-and-click adventure that takes place after the events of the movie. You're a scientist who has crashed on the island, and you need to get 7 dinosaur eggs in less than 12 hours. Many of the transitions and even some of the scenes themselves are handled with full-motion video, which can make this one seem a bit sluggish here and there. There are lots of kiosks where you can learn a tiny bit about certain dinosaurs. You've got to be really careful playing this one because dying can come pretty easily. I never learned how to save, and it's not obvious. Perhaps I should learn to read and take a look at the manual. Anyway, I think I'd recommend learning how to save before you start your adventure in this one.
Hi, I'm Emily Shimura. I'll be your contact on this mission, so keep an eye on your message light. It means I have new information for you.
Jurassic Park also came to the Game Gear. It was also on the Master System, which I'm playing here, but this version wasn't released in Japan and North America. Once again, you play as Dr. Grant. You've been brought to the island to capture all of the dinosaurs that have escaped due to the electric fence malfunctioning. The first part of each stage is you traveling to your destination in your Jeep. Here, you have to protect your vehicle by shooting the suicidal dinosaurs that are trying to get run over. Then you get the opportunity to kill a big one at the end of all this. Now, you're finally on foot. You can shoot dinosaurs and sometimes grab their coins. If you pause, you can select between weapons, but the other 2 are really bad. You can also use this screen to refill your life if you have a first aid kit. Once you adapt to the controls, you'll find that this game can be pretty fun. It can throw a lot at you, like sudden fires that can be rather difficult to escape completely unscathed. The graphics are bright and colorful, much more so than the Genesis version. The music won't annoy you too much. Sega even released an arcade game called Jurassic Park. While this looks like a light gun game, it's not. You actually use joysticks. You and a friend shoot down dinosaurs and whatnot as you move around the park. This one uses Sega's System 32 board, the same one used for Golden Axe, The Revenge of Death Adder. Can you tell? You're almost always moving, and basically you need to shoot
While this looks like a light gun game, it's not.
everything, especially if it's alive. That's right, you don't like it when other things are alive. Some of the scenes will definitely remind you of the movie. Other scenes, not so much. Sega really liked that one scene in the movie where the T-Rex chases you because it happens a lot in this game. This is a pretty short adventure, but it's an arcade, so that's okay. It's fun to play through maybe once every 2 or 3 years, I think. Jurassic Park came to the Super NES courtesy of Ocean. This is, so far, my least favorite one. You play as Dr. Grant again, but this time with an overhead view. You need to run around, zap dinosaurs, which are a pain in the ass by the way, and collect eggs and other items. You can go indoors, and when you do this, the game shifts into a first-person perspective. And boy is it pretty chunky. Despite that, I feel that these parts are far more interesting than the overhead parts, and, well, these parts aren't all that interesting. You basically roam around shooting dinosaurs and collecting items that you need to progress further into the structure, like night vision goggles or ID cards. This one just makes me feel bored. Lastly, Jurassic Park came to the NES, also from Ocean. Like the Super NES game, this one plays from a top-down perspective, but it's not the same game. You run around looking for eggs. You can either collect them or destroy them, it doesn't matter. They just need to be taken care of, they can't just be left sitting out there for the world. You also collect ammo to shoot the dinos that are running around, and you want to be careful to conserve this. After you collect enough eggs, you'll get an icon which will let you open the door to one of the buildings. Now go inside and collect all of the eggs in there. Then do the same for the next building. Then you can finally leave the area and take care of the primary objective of the level. Then you do it all again. I like this one about the same as the Super NES game, I think. It's decent, but far from great. This game also got a port to the Game Boy. Overall, I think I might like the Sega CD version the most. I used to absolutely hate it, but each time I play it, well, it kind of grows on me. The arcade game is great as well, but as you can imagine, there's just not a lot of substance. Now, as you can imagine, there are a lot more Jurassic Park games out there, like Jurassic Park Interactive for the 3DO or the 2015 arcade game called Jurassic Park Arcade. But, of course, those don't count for this episode because they're not just called plain old Jurassic Park. Kind of disappointed, too, because I wanted to cover the 3DO game. Anyway, let's get back to the video games. For some reason, people wanted to see what would happen if you had RoboCop and the Terminator battle each other, so we got a few different games called RoboCop vs. the Terminator. Let's start with the Genesis version from Virgin. I can't believe I've never talked about this game on the show before. You play as RoboCop since he's the good guy, and of course the Terminator is definitely not a good guy. The game runs at a rather brisk speed as you mow down enemies. What's kind of funny is that when RoboCop climbs a ladder or shuffles himself across a wire or a cable, he moves way faster than he can walk. And as you can see, the enemies' deaths are, well, they're not pretty at all. Man, that's gotta hurt. You can collect different weapons in addition to your default pistol, but if you die, you lose the extra ones. Some of the weapons can be kind of weird, like this one which reacts to the direction you press on the D-pad. It also happens to be super powerful. You need to be careful in this one as you have no invincibility time when you get hit, which can result in an instant death if you're not careful. That's probably my biggest nitpick with this game. The graphics are pretty good for the system, no complaints at all here. The music is super cheesy and it doesn't really fit at all. It often says Terminator for some reason.
Terminator.
It's so bizarre. Some boss fights like this one don't even have any music. Oops. Overall, this one's pretty good.
Terminator.
This is the Super Nintendo version of RoboCop vs. the Terminator from Interplay. Like the Genesis game, this is also a side-scrolling action platformer where you have to shoot down your enemies. But most of the enemies here are completely different. The stages are sometimes similar, but the layouts are definitely not. Some of the stages here are a bit more maze-like. You also have different weapons. The enemies don't have spectacular deaths here, but they often take more hits before they go down. That said, the game doesn't feel any more difficult, but it is certainly more boring. Between many of the levels, you're presented with a comic-style cutscene depicting the story. These are quite slow, and it's rather difficult to resist the urge to skip them. The graphics feature a bit more color than the Genesis game, but they aren't in any way spectacular. Somehow, the music is even worse than the Genesis game. You can kind of tell that the composer didn't have much interest in this one. I think that this game could be a lot better. A Game Boy version was released, also from Interplay. This is also a side-scrolling action platformer. However, in this one, there's definitely more of a platforming aspect. Here, you can only shoot up at a 45-degree angle, never straight up. You can get a Contra-like spread shot which will disappear once you clear the area. You even go to future Los Angeles and battle Skynet. If that's not enough, you even get to take out the biggest threat to RoboCop. That's right, spiders! The game as a whole moves extremely slow and it can be quite laggy as you don't shoot very fast. Once again, the music isn't very good, but a few of the tunes are on the cusp of being almost decent. And just for fun, here's the NES version. This one was completed but never actually released. Once again, it's an action platformer pseudo run and gun, which is really the only thing all of these games have in common. That and you play as RoboCop. This one would have come out very, very late in the console's life, which is likely why it didn't get released. Well, that plus the fact that it's rather boring. I hope you like climbing ladders really slowly. The way RoboCop moves on ladders is like the opposite of the Genesis game. Everything here seems rather empty and bleak. The music is, well, you guessed it, it's pretty bad. We didn't miss out on a whole heck of a lot by not getting this one. Overall, I think it's quite clear that the Genesis version of RoboCop vs. the Terminator is the best one. And before you tell me I forgot the Game Gear game, no I didn't. That's a port of the Genesis game, so it doesn't count for this episode. It has really good voices though.
You're terminated.
Okay, I guess I do need to do Ninja Gaiden. I talked about the Xbox version a couple of episodes back, so I'll keep that one as brief as I can. Anyway, this franchise from Tecmo started in the arcades in the latter part of 1988. It's sort of a beat-em-up. I haven't ever really been able to get a good handle on this game, and as a result, well, I just never cared for it. It doesn't matter much though, as it wasn't a huge hit in the arcades. That's probably because it wasn't very intuitive and the hit detection is just weird. The graphics and audio were average for 1988. My favorite thing about this one is the continue screen, which I thought was pretty badass. Hell, I still think that. Then, in 1988 and 89, Tecmo brought Ninja Gaiden to the NES. Now it's a fast-paced action platformer. You can get lots of cool sub-weapons, climb on walls, and jump around like a monkey. It also has cool cutscenes which were the talk of the town when it was new. It also happens to present a lot of challenge, and you'll be dying and retrying a lot before you finally learn the patterns to everything here. This was a great way to reinvent the Ninja Gaiden franchise, and it would go on to have sequels of its own. But this wasn't the only 8-bit game called Ninja Gaiden. That's right, Ninja Gaiden ended up on the Sega Master System as well. It's also a side-scrolling platformer with a few moves that seem to be inspired by the NES game, but make no mistake, this game is its own thing. In this one, you can flip up while hanging from certain surfaces. Gone is the wall climbing ability, but now you can do wall jumps. The entire game is an exercise in extremely poor game design. Sega just didn't know how to handle the franchise. The game's main challenge is designed around bumping you into the countless bottomless pits which are all over the place. The control has issues as well. Sometimes I have a hard time turning around to face the direction that I want to move. The crows here fly at you super fast and are nearly impossible to avoid. I imagine that the game plays better on a PAL console, as I assume it runs slower. That would probably help because at least then the reaction time that you'd need would be closer to reasonable. The graphics are colorful and they look pretty good, but the music is just awful. It just drones on and on. Just for fun, let's check out the Genesis version, also made by Sega. This game was never finished, much less released. It goes back to the beat-em-up style of the original arcade, even featuring some of the same enemies like these guys in hockey masks. The gameplay itself is much better though, at least for the most part. The challenge isn't in here yet, as everyone dies with only 1 or 2 hits. You have a special move that takes part of your life away even if it doesn't connect with anyone. The graphics are average, and the music was shaping up to be fairly decent. I think this one could have been okay if it had been finished, but certainly not as good as the NES game. Then there's Ninja Gaiden on the Game Gear, once again by Sega. You thought this would be the same as the Master System game, but no, it's almost entirely different. Your character is pretty janky looking this time around. The wall climbing ability is back. If you die at any point, even while fighting a boss, you need to replay through the entire stage. I imagine they do that because this game is pretty short. It's a little better than the Master System version, but the gameplay can still feel a little cheap. Overall, it's a rather basic game which shows none of the careful design of the NES title. Let's face it, Sega kind of sucks at Ninja Gaiden. Finally, we have Ninja Gaiden on the Xbox. Now it's a full-fledged 3D action game. It's a really good one too. It's tough as nails, but if you're persistent, you'll do okay after many, many deaths. This one added lots of blood and gory deaths to the mix. It would also go on to spawn 2 sequels of its own. Be sure to try this one if you haven't. It took Tecmo to make Ninja Gaiden good again. I'll just leave it at that. I was surprised at how many games are called Taz-Mania. Originally, it was an animated show that I don't think I ever saw, but seems like everyone and their mom had an idea of how to turn it into a video game. Taz-Mania on the Genesis from Sega of America was the first Taz game I ever played. I had mixed feelings about it at the time, but nowadays I can appreciate it a lot more. This one's a side-scrolling platformer where you can jump, spin attack, and you also have a button to use items like pulling switches and whatnot. Taz will attempt to eat anything he comes across. This can include chili peppers, which will let you breathe fire for a while. There's also food and water, which will restore your life. Unfortunately, this means he'll also automatically eat bombs, which will take off a huge portion of your life meter. And some of these bombs can be hidden behind the foreground graphics, or at the bottom of a fall before you have time to notice them. Yeah, fun stuff. Your spinning is your only method of attack as it flings things away. You can also use this to fling stuff away that you don't want Taz to eat, like the bombs. This was a fairly early game for the system, and as such the design isn't the deepest, but it's good enough. There are a lot of fun stages to play through here. The graphics are outstanding, especially for their time. It really looked like a cartoon when it came out, with simple drawings and colors everywhere. Nothing here tries to be too detailed, and I think it works in the game's favor. Unfortunately, it only runs at 30 frames per second. Well, except for this boss fight, which runs at 60 for some reason. Why did they code this screen differently? So weird. Maybe they were trying to be like Avatar 2, switching frame rates back and forth. Wow, that comment's not gonna date this episode or anything. The music goes with the game extremely well, though it's certainly not something you'd ever listen to without playing the game. It does its best to sound like a cartoon and time itself with the action on screen. I'd say it does a quite admirable job, especially for the time. The only bad thing I'd have to say about this game is that sometimes you have to take leaps of faith, as you can't see where you need to go because it's not on the screen. At times, you just have to know exactly where to land before you jump. Overall, this is a great Taz-Mania game, and you should absolutely try it. Sega made a Taz-Mania for the Master System as well. While this one has a lot of the same enemies and items, the stages and gameplay are different. Taz still automatically eats items, including the bombs. However, this one is more of a horizontally oriented action game with much less verticality to the stages. You can use your spin attack in the air in this game. As a result, you'll find yourself using the spin attack a lot more, especially since it can help you cross large gaps. Oh, and this one is filled with tons of bottomless pits. It should be noted that in this game, you also have a separate meter for your spin. This is a fairly basic side-scroller that's not overly special, but it's not awful either. The graphics here are quite nice for the most part, with great use of color. The music is a lot more lively and it doesn't try to sound like a cartoon. Instead, it sounds just like any other average game on the platform. You could do worse than this game, but I'd certainly rather play the Genesis version. Like Ninja Gaiden, Taz-Mania was actually different on the Game Gear. This one is really, really bad. I get the feeling that this one was made by people who have never played a game before. The entire game is saddled with extreme slowdown. Right at the very start of Stage 1, you're being chased by a mouse on a boulder. Your life and spin meter are one and the same, and it constantly goes down if you spin. You have to stop and eat food to keep it up, and Taz doesn't do that automatically here. If you miss even one food item, you're probably done. This stage is similar to one in the Genesis version, but there's no way that it moves fast enough to ever catch you by surprise. There is no way I can die here. Oh, what? How the hell am I supposed to get past that? Oh, I guess I could have gone up. Oh, and I love that you start from the very beginning of the stage when you die. The graphics are a horrible mess, and the music. Oh my god, the music. It's literally just someone who is very, very angry pounding on a cheap MIDI keyboard. They probably told the composer to play the game before they did the music, and that's why they're pissed off. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot, there are no continues. I don't understand why they didn't just port the Master System game to the Game Gear. Stay away from this one at all costs. Taz-Mania was also on the Super NES from Sunsoft. In this one, you run down the road. Your goal is to eat a predetermined number of yellow kiwi birds that are also running down the road for whatever reason. Of course, you need to do this before the time runs out. Why Taz feels the need to do this, I do not know, but he seems to enjoy it, so who am I to judge? Once he eats enough yellow kiwis, he falls asleep and the round ends. As you can imagine, the kiwis get harder and harder to grab the further you get into the game, and you also need more of them. There are plenty of obstacles on the side of the road and even on the road itself to get in your way. If you slam into something, you'll need to shake it off with the D-pad before you're able to move again, and the clock never stops running. You can also do the Taz spinning thing, which makes you go really fast. This is almost uncontrollable, but it helps in later levels when the kiwis get too fast. You have a meter in the bottom left corner which tells you how much spin you have remaining. There are blue birds you can eat, which will refill your spin meter, and red birds, which will give you more time. You definitely want all the red birds you can get. I like the graphics here, as they're pretty colorful and fun. This is not Mode 7, by the way. The music sucks though it does sound like the world's most acclaimed symphony orchestra compared to the Game Gear game. Overall, I feel this game is a great idea for a bonus stage in a different game or something, but somehow Sunsoft made an entire game out of it and it gets tiresome faster than it should. Taz-Mania arrived on the Game Boy, also courtesy of Sunsoft. This is another crap fest for Taz. The graphics are really good for the Game Boy. The controls are also quite responsive, but the level design is, well, it's boneheaded. The very first screen in Stage 1, you're presented with an easy death as these platforms drop out beneath you. Yeah, great way to start the game. You have a limited number of spins in this one, and you kind of just have to wait for him to stop. As a result, the game heavily discourages you from using Taz's signature move. You can bounce on an enemy to temporarily stun them, and the enemies just hop up and down or back and forth. In fact, the enemy AI, if you can even call it AI, reminds me of super early arcade games. The music is also straight out of an early 80s arcade game. Oh, and of course there's a timer. I grew tired of this one quickly. But wait, why have one Taz-Mania game on the Game Boy when you can have two? This one is from Beam Software and THQ, and it wasn't released in North America. I've got to admit that this one is less annoying to play than the Sunsoft game, but only by a little bit. You run around and have to navigate many platforms. Your spin move is your only attack and defense. It of course has its own meter. There are items to restore some or all of your spin meter laying around. You also have a life meter that can take 5 hits. You can eat an egg to get 1 heart back, and you're gonna need it because there are no checkpoints in these stages. Taz will once again automatically eat bombs, though here they're sticks of dynamite. You can also get different kinds of attacks like this thing that you throw. Oh, and the boss has no life bar, so I have no idea if I'm damaging him. There are no continues in this game. The graphics are nowhere near as good as the Sunsoft game, but they work. The music is better and it has more modern melodies, but it's still nothing special. The floaty physics combined with the poor visibility making it tough to see oncoming obstacles make it a pass for me. It probably goes without saying that the Genesis Taz-Mania is far and away the best one. The second best one would be the Master System game, followed closely by the Super Nintendo version. The portable versions can suck it. Alright, let's finish this episode up with a couple of titles that often get mentioned for their differences. I'm actually surprised that I didn't include these in the previous 2 same name different game episodes, but maybe I didn't do it because everyone else always mentions them. But like Ninja Gaiden, I've got to include these just basically for completeness' sake, so let's get to it. Rocket Knight Adventures from Konami on the Genesis was a great action game. You play as a possum named Sparkster, and you spend a lot of your time taking out pigs and their crazy machines. This is a game that Konami put a lot of effort into, and it shows. You can charge your shot up by pressing down the attack button and then bounce around, which is helpful for damaging enemies as well as getting around certain parts of the game. You can also hang from your tail in many situations. It's exclusively on the Genesis, but I think that Konami wanted to make a mascot out of Sparkster. So Konami released 2 different versions of the sequel, simply called Sparkster. First up is the Genesis version. At the end of the intro, we get a screen that says Rocket Knight Adventures 2, but nowhere on the box or the regular title screen is this shown. What's interesting is that the intro here is playable, but if you want, you can just skip it by pressing the start button. However, you'll need to win this fight if you want to collect one of the secret swords in the game. Initially, it looks like the graphics have taken a huge nosedive compared to Rocket Knight Adventures, and for the most part, they are more simple here. They do get a little better as you progress though. Now, the Rocket Pack charges on its own and you use it with its own dedicated button. Fortunately, it charges pretty fast. You still use this to bounce around the levels. In fact, the game relies much more on the Rocket Pack, which kind of brings it down a bit in my opinion. The game can be extremely difficult in spots, though not in a way where it makes you want to keep trying. Some of it just feels like bad level design. You'll have to do entire sections again if you die. For example, if you die while fighting this boss, well, then you're gonna have to work your way through this very slow auto-scrolling stage to try again. Worse yet, this stage is very maze-like, requiring you to blindly navigate through many chutes to destroy all of the propellers. Then you need to attack it from underneath. It takes quite a while. However, if you die at any point, well, you get to start over from the very beginning. It's so discouraging. The only thing about this game that I personally feel is better than the first is the music, which is fantastic here. Now, don't get me wrong, this is still a good game. It's just disappointing compared to the original. Sparkster on the Super NES is a different beast. This one works more like the original Rocket Knight Adventures on the Genesis, and as such it feels more like a true follow-up. You have to hold your attack button to charge your rocket, and the game's stage design isn't as rocket-happy as the Genesis version of Sparkster. You also hang from your tail here a lot more compared to the Genesis Sparkster. The stages themselves, of course, are completely unique. Many of them are more exploratory in nature. There aren't really any maze-like stages here. Well, actually, scratch that. There's this one, but it's only a little bit ridiculous. I don't like it when I end up in this room because it completely reverses your controls, including the buttons. Kinda clever, actually. All you have to do is get out of this small room and you're fine, but that might be tougher than you think. Like the other games, there are sometimes stages where you ride mechanical contraptions that go on for longer than they should. They could have used an editor. I do like this shooter stage though. It ends right before it begins to wear out its welcome. And of course there are the giant robot punchy things, but these are much more responsive here. I feel the graphics are vastly better than the Genesis Sparkster, but not quite as good as the Genesis original for the most part. The music here is once again excellent, but I think I need to give the nod to the Genesis music as the overall winner. This is a pretty good game that has a lot to offer. I've heard that a lot of people prefer the Genesis Sparkster over this one. Well, I personally feel that the Super NES game is definitely the better Sparkster, but the original Rocket Knight Adventures crushes both of them. Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse on the Genesis from Sega is one of my favorite games, period. It's a platformer where you unsurprisingly play as Mickey Mouse and guide him through many different levels. You start out in the Green Forest where you get used to the controls. But soon it gets dark and spooky, and you might need to have someone close to you if you get too scared. There's a Toyland, and this level is really fun. I like the segment that flips the level upside down and you end up walking on the ceiling. This blew my mind back in the day. The library is a great stage as well, especially when you go inside the milk jug. In here is some sickeningly sweet candy with some wicked sweet scrolling. Basically, you bounce on enemies with your ass to defeat them. You do this by jumping and pressing the C button in mid-air. This results in a high bounce once you hit an enemy. But if you press down instead of C in mid-air, you'll still bounce and kill the enemy, but your bounce will be much softer. You can also kill the enemies by throwing apples and candles that you collect. This is a very early game for the console, so it's pretty short and honestly quite easy. But that's okay, I never get bored going through this one from beginning to end, multiple times a year in fact. Sega also took the opportunity to put Castle of Illusion on the Master System and the Game Gear since they had the license. I mean, why not, right? But here, they completely changed everything. The stages are all different, though the scenes are similar to the Genesis game, like a forest or a clock tower or what have you. You can still butt bounce on enemies to kill them. But here you can also pick things up, carry them, set them down, or even throw them. Or you can use these items to get to higher places. There are also treasure chests which can contain coins or maybe even a cake to refill your life meter. The stages here aren't as linear as the Genesis game. While there aren't as many levels here, it will take you just as long, if not longer, to complete this one than the Genesis game, even if you know what you're doing. A lot of people prefer this one over the Genesis title. I'm not one of those people, but I can see why people might like it more. I mean, for one, when it comes to the gameplay, there's more substance here than the Genesis game. There's just more to do. For an 8-bit game, it's outstanding in every way. In fact, I'm sad that this didn't come out sooner in the console's life. If the Master System had a game or two like this near the beginning of its life, Sega might have done a lot better in that market. I still prefer the arcade-like quality of the Genesis game, and the fact that I'm so good at it might play into that preference as well. You simply cannot go wrong with either of these games, that's for sure. I might as well mention Castle of Illusion for the PlayStation 3, which came out in 2013. It's also on the Xbox 360 and, well, a ton of other platforms. This is basically a remake of the Genesis game. I'm not entirely sure that it counts for this episode, but I wanted to show it really quick. Although the gameplay is still mostly 2D or 2.5D, most of the stages have been vastly changed around. It does a few of its own things here and there as well, like running through these sprouting dead vine things, or jumping on these wafers floating in milk to get to other areas. In fact, many things that this game does pushes the gameplay into the 3D realm. Overall, it's a great game, though not quite as endearing as either the Genesis or the Master System games. This one was also never released physically. So, which is your favorite Castle of Illusion? And there you go, a bunch of games with the same name that are in fact different games. Who knew? In fact, I think there are probably a lot of other examples that I could choose if I were to cover this topic again, like say the Terminator, for example. That's an easy pick, and I haven't done that one yet. But what are some games that have the same name but, are different games that you think I should cover in a future episode? Let me know. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSag. Hey, Skeleton, how's it going?
Hi, Joe. Oh, just sitting around being a skeleton, I guess. What's up with you?
Oh, not much. Just sitting here enjoying my skin, blood, muscle, and heck, even my sinew.
Oh, man, I miss having skin.
Skeleton, you are so incredibly stupid. You're a fake skeleton. You never had skin.
I'm fake?
That's right, I bought you at a Halloween store.
You mean my whole death is a lie? I'm gonna have my revenge on you.
You stupid fake skeleton. Everyone knows that only real skeletons can get revenge.
Wait a minute. You said I was a fake skeleton, right?
Exactly. You were never even lucky enough to decompose.
Let me ask you this. Can fake skeletons talk?
Of course not. Everyone knows that only real skeletons can talk.
Which means?
You're a real skeleton!